The casket was closed by the time they dragged me past it. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. My wife Eleanor and I were married for 41 years. We met in a laundromat in Pittsburgh in 1983. She had a paperback of John Updike in her hand and a quarter stuck in the dryer. I helped her get the quarter out. 3 weeks later, I asked her to marry me on the steps of the Carnegie Library, and she said yes before I finished the sentence. We raised one son. We buried 2 dogs and 1 parakeet. We paid off a small house in Bethel Park, and then we paid off a bigger one in Mount Lebanon. She taught 3rd grade for 36 years. I built mechanical contractors into a company that, by the time I sold my majority share in 2019, employed 412 people across 3 states. None of that mattered the morning of November the 8th, because the morning of November the 8th, I stood in a parking lot in the rain, in a suit she had picked out for me, and watched 2 men in black windbreakers tell me I was not on the list. Sir, step back from the door. The man who said it was maybe 30 years old, shaved head, an earpiece, like he was guarding the president. I looked at him and I laughed. I genuinely laughed. I thought it was some kind of mix-up, some clerical thing the funeral home had done. Somebody confused me with another widower. I said, "Son, I'm Eleanor's husband. That's my wife in there." He didn't move. He said, "I have my instructions, sir." I looked past him into the foyer of the funeral home, and I saw my son Bradley standing there in a dark suit, hands folded in front of him like he was at a board meeting. He looked at me through the glass. He saw me. And then he turned his back. I want you to picture that for a second. 41 years I had been married to that woman. 3 days earlier I had sat with her in the hospital and held her hand while she stopped breathing. I had picked out the casket. I had paid the deposit. I had written the obituary on a yellow legal pad at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. while the dog whined at my feet. I had called her sister in Phoenix. I had called her old principal. I had called the church. And now I was standing in a parking lot, watching my own son turn his back. I tried to push past the guard. I'm 67 years old. I'm not a small man, but I'm not a young one either. He put a hand on my chest, and the other man stepped up behind him, and the second man was bigger. They didn't hurt me. I want to be clear about that. They were professionals. They simply moved me the way you move a piece of furniture you don't want in a room. I shouted Eleanor's name. I shouted it once, and then again, and then a 3rd time, and by the 3rd time it didn't sound like a word anymore. It sounded like an animal, and a woman in a long coat coming up the walk stopped and stared at me with her mouth open, and her child pressed against her leg. They put me on a bench by the parking lot. That's where I sat, in a charcoal gray suit my wife had bought me at Macy's for our 40th anniversary, in the rain, while 60 or 70 people walked past me into the building where my wife's body was. Some of them I knew. My old foreman Hank from the company, Eleanor's bridge club, the neighbors. None of them looked at me. None of them. Hank's wife glanced once and then looked at her shoes. I understood later that Bradley had told them all some version of a story before they arrived. I don't know what story. I had my guesses. I sat on that bench for an hour and 20 minutes. I watched my wife's funeral happen through a window. At one point, I saw Bradley get up to speak. I saw his mouth move. I saw his wife Cassandra sitting in the front pew with my granddaughter Lily on her lap, and Lily was crying and Cassandra was patting her absently, the way you pat a purse. Your checking is still there. I had not seen my granddaughter in almost 2 years. That fact is going to matter in a minute, so hold on to it. When the service ended, I stood up. My knees popped. I walked to my car, which was a 2018 Buick that Eleanor had picked out because she said it was a grandfather car. And I was a grandfather, and I sat behind the wheel and I did not turn the key. I just sat there. The rain was coming down harder. The hearse pulled around the side door, and they brought her out in the casket, and I watched 4 men I had never seen before in my life carry my wife to a car that would take her to a hole in the ground I had paid for. That's when I made the call. I want you to understand something else before I tell you who I called, because if I don't tell you this part, the rest of the story is going to sound like a fairy tale. And what I'm telling you is not a fairy tale. It is the truth. And the truth has a structure that the man on the bench did not yet know he was sitting on top of. When I sold my company in 2019, I didn't sell it the way people sell companies in movies. I didn't take a check and go play golf. I sold a majority interest, 51%, to a private equity group out of Cleveland. I kept the rest. I kept 29% in my own name in a holding company that I had set up in 2003 with the help of a lawyer named Whitman Greer. Whitman was my college roommate at Carnegie Mellon. He'd practiced corporate law in Pittsburgh for 40 years. He was the kind of friend who, when my mother died in 1991, drove down from Erie in a snowstorm to sit at the funeral home with me for 6 hours and didn't say more than 20 words. That kind of friend, the other 20% of my company, when I sold it, I did not put in my name. I put it in a trust. And the beneficiary of that trust, the sole beneficiary of that trust, the sole beneficiary was not my son. I'll come back to that. Now. The call. I sat in the Buick and I pulled out my phone and I scrolled past Eleanor's name in my contacts, which I had not been able to make myself delete, and I called Whitman Greer. He answered on the second ring. Frank, he said, because that's my name, Frank. I was just thinking about you. I'm so sorry about Eleanor. Margaret and I sent flowers. Are you holding up? I told him what had just happened. I told him in a voice that did not sound like mine. I told him about the guards and the bench and the granddaughter on Cassandra's lap. When I was done, there was a long silence on the line. Then Whitman said, Frank, are you in your car right now? Yes. Drive home. Don't go to the cemetery. Don't go to the reception. Go home. I'll be at your house in 2 hours. Do you remember what we put in place in 2003? Yes. Do you remember what we updated in 2017? Yes. Frank, listen to me. You don't do anything until I get there. Don't call anyone. Don't post anything. Don't talk to Bradley. Do you understand? I said yes. He said, I'm leaving the office right now. I drove home in the rain. I unlocked the front door of a house that still smelled like my wife. Her reading glasses were on the kitchen counter. There was a half-finished crossword on the table, dated 3 days before she died. She always did them in pen. She got most of them right. I sat down at the table and I looked at the crossword and I tried to remember the last thing I had said to her that wasn't about hospitals or medication or pain. I couldn't remember. I sat there for a long time trying to remember, and I couldn't. Whitman pulled into my driveway at 4:11 in the afternoon. He came in without knocking. He took off his coat. He looked older than I remembered, and I had seen him at Christmas. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and he put a manila folder on the wood between us. Tell me again, he said, from the beginning. So, I told him again. About Bradley walking out of the hospital on the second day Eleanor was in there with a phone call about a meeting in Phoenix. About Cassandra not coming at all. Not once, the whole 2 weeks. About the voicemail I had left Bradley the night Eleanor died, where I'd said, please come home, your mother is gone, and the voicemail he had not returned. About finding out about the funeral arrangements from the funeral home director, who called me to confirm details I had not made. About showing up at my own wife's wake and being put on a bench in the rain. Whitman wrote nothing down. He just listened. When I finished, he opened the folder. Frank, I need to ask you some questions and I need you to be honest with me. Okay? Okay. Are you sure about this? About what you're about to do? Because once we start, it goes. I said. He hired men to keep me out of her funeral. Whitman nodded slowly. All right, he said. Then let me tell you what we have. And he told me. We had, sitting in that trust I'd set up in 2003 and updated in 2017, the 20% stake in the company I had founded. We had the deed to the house Bradley lived in Sewickley, the 4-bedroom colonial with the pool he had moved into in 2014, which I had bought outright and which was technically a lease-to-own arrangement that he had never finished paying on because I had let him pay me a token $400 a month, which I had been putting straight back into Lily's college fund without telling anyone. We had the loan agreement for Cassandra's interior design business, which she had started in 2016 with $140,000 in startup capital, that everyone in the family understood had been a gift from Eleanor and me. But that was, on paper, a loan with a promissory note and a personal guarantee secured by their second car. We had the trust documents for Lily's education fund, which I was the sole trustee of, and which contained $486,000. And we had the will. Eleanor's will, updated 3 months before she died. I did not know my wife had updated her will 3 months before she died. She came to my office in August, Whitman said. She drove herself. She did not tell you. She did not tell Bradley. She told me she had a feeling, and she wanted things settled. She made specific provisions, Frank. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. She asked me to wait until after. He slid a copy across the table. I read it. I read it twice. I will tell you what was in it in a minute. First I have to tell you what I did with what was in it, because that's the part that matters. Whitman left at 7 that night. Before he left, we made a list. We made a list of every legal instrument I held over Bradley and Cassandra's life. And we made a schedule for executing them. And we drafted 3 letters and 2 filings, and Whitman said he would file them in the morning. Then he stood at my door with his coat over his arm, and he said, Frank, I have to ask, is there any version of this where you call him tomorrow morning and you sit down with him and you let him explain? I thought about it. I thought about my granddaughter on Cassandra's lap crying, while my son in his dark suit gave a speech about a mother he had not visited in the hospital. I thought about the bench. I thought about the rain. I thought about the second guard, the bigger one, and the way he'd put his hand on my chest. I thought about Hank's wife looking at her shoes. I said, no. Whitman nodded. He said, I'll see you in the morning. That night, I slept on the couch because I could not bear to be in the bedroom. The dog, who was a 16-year-old beagle named Buster, that Eleanor had named after her father, slept on the floor next to me. At 3 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Bradley. I did not answer. He called again at 3:04. He called again at 3:09. I turned the phone face down. He left no voicemails. I would learn later he had called because Cassandra had received a courtesy call from her bank notifying her that $147,000 in commercial debt secured by their household assets had been called due in 30 days. The bank had been required to notify her in the evening because of the size and the speed. Whitman had not waited until morning on that one. In the morning, I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at Eleanor's crossword, the unfinished one. The clue she had not gotten was 23 across, 6 letters, forsaken. I wrote in pencil under her handwriting, abandon. It fit. Then I drove to Whitman's office. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life because I felt nothing. I am telling you that honestly. I felt nothing. I was a piece of paper moving through a machine. We filed the foreclosure notice on the house in Sewickley on Tuesday. We filed the collection demand on Cassandra's business loan on Tuesday. We notified the private equity group in Cleveland that I was, effective immediately, exercising the consultation clause in our shareholder agreement regarding executive hires, which meant that Bradley, who had been employed by my old company as a vice president of business development at a salary of $240,000 a year since 2019 as part of the sale terms, was now subject to a review that I was permitted to participate in. We sent letters. Whitman sent letters. The lawyer in Cleveland sent letters. By Thursday morning, my phone had 43 missed calls. By Friday, it had 91. I read none of them. Whitman had told me not to. On Saturday, Bradley showed up at the house. He drove a 2024 Lexus that I had co-signed the loan for in 2023. He was wearing a sweatshirt and jeans. He looked like he had not slept. He stood on my porch, and he rang the doorbell, and when I opened the door, he said, Dad. He had not called me Dad in maybe 4 years. It had been Frank. For 4 years, it had been Frank. For 4 years, it had been Frank. I looked at him. He was 41 years old, the same number of years I had been married. He had Eleanor's eyes. He had Eleanor's nose. He had my hairline. He had my mother's hands. He was crying. He said, "Dad, please. We need to talk. Please." I let him in. I did not say a word. I let him in because Whitman had told me that at some point this would happen, and he had told me what to do. I sat down at the kitchen table. He sat across from me. The crossword was still there. He said, "Dad, I don't know what's happening, but it's happening too fast. And Cassandra is, Dad, the bank called. They're calling the loan, and the house, they sent a letter about the house. And my job, they put me on review at work, and they're talking about Phoenix being canceled. And I don't, Dad, please, I'm sorry. Whatever I did, I'm sorry." I let him finish. Then I said, "Tell me about the guards." He went white. "Tell me about the men you hired to keep me out of your mother's funeral." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "Tell me," I said, "about how you stood in that foyer and watched them put your father on a bench in the rain." He started to cry. He said, "Dad, you don't understand. Cassandra said, she said you were going to make a scene. She said you were going to, Dad, Mom was sick for a long time, and you weren't yourself. And the last time we were at the house, you and I had that fight, and Cassandra said, Cassandra, I said, yes. Cassandra said, yes. Cassandra said, yes." I looked at my son. I let it sit there. I said, "Bradley, your mother knew." He looked at me. I said, "Your mother went to see Whitman in August. By herself. She drove herself. She updated her will. Do you know what she said to him?" He didn't say anything. I said, "She told him she did not want you to inherit the estate. She told him she wanted everything that was hers, every dollar, every piece of property she had her name on, every share of the company I gave her in 1998, every penny, to go into a trust for Lily. She told him she'd watched what your wife was doing to our family, and she'd watched what you had allowed it to do to you, and she said," and I am quoting Whitman directly, "My granddaughter is going to be raised by people who do not understand love, and I am not going to leave them money to do it with." Bradley was making a sound that I had not heard him make since he was 9 years old, and his rabbit died. I said, "She updated it 3 months before she died, Bradley. She did that while you were ignoring her phone calls. She did that the same month Cassandra posted on Facebook that, quote, your mother-in-law, unquote, was, quote, finally, quote, going to be out of their hair. We all saw the post, Bradley. Your mother saw it. Your mother was reading those posts in a hospice bed 3 weeks later. Did you know that?" He was on the floor now. He had slid out of the chair onto the kitchen floor. He was a 41-year-old man on a kitchen floor. I said, "I'm going to tell you what is going to happen now, and I'm going to say it once. The trust for Lily, your mother's trust, you cannot touch. You will not see a dollar of it. Lily will receive distributions for education and medical needs through Whitman until she is 25, at which point the principal becomes hers. The house in Sewickley I am foreclosing on. You have 30 days. Cassandra's business loan I am collecting. She has 30 days. Your job at the company. I have already had the conversation with Cleveland. They are letting you go on Monday with 3 months severance, which is more than you deserve and less than I could have made them give. The Lexus I am calling the loan on, which means the bank is going to call you Monday and ask for the title. The co-signed credit cards I am removing my name from, which means your credit limit is going to drop by approximately $90,000 on Tuesday." I paused. "You will not see Lily again until she is old enough to ask to see you herself. Whitman has filed for visitation rights on my behalf. We are going to win. Cassandra knows we are going to win, because she has been served a copy of the post she made on Facebook in August, which the court is going to see." He looked up at me. He said, "Dad." I said, "I sat on a bench in the rain." He said, "Dad, please." I said, "I sat on a bench in the rain, Bradley, while your mother was inside. I called her name. There were people I have known for 30 years who walked past me. There was a woman with a child who looked at me like I was a homeless man. I am 67 years old. Your mother and I were married for 41 years. I held her hand when she died. I picked the music for the service that you would not let me into. And I sat on a bench in the rain. I stood up. I said, "Get out of my house." He left. He walked out. He did not say anything else. He got in the Lexus, which he would not own in a week, and he drove away. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. The dog put his head on my foot. The crossword was still there. I picked up Eleanor's pen, the one she always used, a blue Pilot G2 she got in bulk at Costco, and I wrote, in the margin, in her empty crossword, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I do not know who I was apologizing to. I want to tell you what happened next, because I know that is what you want to know. I know how stories work. I know that you have been listening to me, and you have been waiting for me to tell you that I forgave him, that there was a reconciliation, that he came back on his hands and knees, and I took him in my arms, and we cried together, and we rebuilt. I am not going to tell you that, because that is not what happened. What happened is this. Bradley moved out of the house in Sewickley 31 days after our conversation. He moved into an apartment in Robinson Township. Cassandra filed for divorce 6 weeks after that, which surprised exactly no one who had been paying attention. The business folded. The Lexus went back to the dealer. Bradley took a job, through a friend of a friend, at a smaller firm in Cranberry, for about a third of what he had been making. He sold most of the furniture. He kept the dog, a little white thing Cassandra had insisted on buying and never walked. I did not speak to him for 14 months. In month 15, I got a letter. A handwritten letter, 8 pages on yellow legal paper, the same kind I had written Eleanor's obituary on. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for the house back. He did not ask for the job. He asked, in the last paragraph, if I would meet him at a diner in Mountain Inn, Lebanon, the one his mother and I used to take him to on Sunday mornings when he was small. I went. I sat across from him in a booth that smelled like coffee and old vinyl. He had lost about 30 pounds. He looked like a man who had been in a long fight with himself and had finally, just barely, started to win it. He did not ask for forgiveness. He told me instead what he had figured out, about himself, about what he had let happen, about what he had allowed her to convince him of, about what he had not done for his mother. About the moment, in the foyer, when he had turned his back on me through the glass, and what that moment had looked like to him later, when he was alone in an apartment with a yappy little dog, replaying it over and over. I listened. When he was done, I said, "I'm going to bring Lily to see you next Saturday." He started to cry. I said, "I am not your father anymore the way I used to be. I don't know what we are. We are going to find out. But you are Lily's father, and she is going to need one, and you are the one she has." That was 8 months ago. We are not what we were. I do not know that we will ever be what we were. There is a bench and a parking lot in the rain that is always going to be between us. But Lily comes to the house on Saturdays now, and she does crosswords with me at our grandmother's table, and last week she got 23 across without any help from me. The clue was different. The clue was 4 letters to forgive a debt. She wrote in her grandmother's blue Pilot G2, YPE. I looked at it for a long time. I did not change it, so I will tell you what I have learned, and then I will let you go, because I know I have kept you a long time, and I am old and I tend to ramble. I have learned that the people who love you can be turned, but the love does not disappear. It only gets buried. And what you do when you find out it has been buried is the most important thing you will ever do. I have learned that mercy and justice are not opposites. I have learned that a woman in a hospice bed reading her daughter-in-law's Facebook posts has a clearer view of a family than anyone in that family knows. I have learned that a bench in a parking lot in the rain is, sometimes, the place where a man finally sees his life. And I have learned that when a son turns his back on his father through a pane of glass, the father has in his hand more than the son knows. He always did. He always will. 43 missed calls. Then 91. Then, eventually, 8 pages on yellow paper. Eleanor knew. She knew before I did. She left me the tools, and she left me the choice. I made the choice she would have made. I am not proud of all of it. But I made it. If you are out there, and you are sitting in a car in a parking lot somewhere, with a phone in your hand, and you are trying to decide whether the people who hurt you should get to walk away from it clean, I will tell you what my wife told her lawyer in an office in August, 3 months before she died. She said, "Love is not the same thing as permission." I think about that every day. I think about it when Lily is in the kitchen. I think about it when Bradley calls on Sundays. I think about it when I sit at the table by myself, with the dog at my feet, and the crossword in front of me, and the chair across from me empty. Love, she said, is not the same thing as permission. She was right. She was always right. I sat on that bench in the rain for an hour and 20 minutes, and I have thought about it every single day since. Not because of the cold, or the suit Eleanor picked out for me, or even the guards. I think about it because of what was happening inside me on that bench. In the quiet, something was being decided that I did not yet know I was deciding. Here's what I have come to understand, slowly, in the years since. Bradley did not turn his back on me in that foyer because he was evil. He turned his back because, year after year, in small, unnoticed moments, he had said yes to things he should have said no to. Cassandra did not raise her hand and force him to do it. She simply made the easy thing easier and the hard thing harder, and he picked easy enough times that easy became who he was. That is how a man loses his spine. Not in one decision. In 1,000 small ones he was not paying attention to. Cause and effect. That is the only law I trust anymore. Eleanor saw it before I did. She sat in a hospice bed and read a Facebook post. And she understood in a way I did not, that what we had been seeing for years was not a phase. It was a direction. She made her will accordingly. She did not curse our son. She simply stopped pretending that love required her to fund the people who were hurting her. That, I think now, was the wisest thing she ever did, and she had done a lot of wise things. I used to believe that being a good father meant always opening the door. I do not believe that anymore. I believe being a good father means knowing which doors to open and which doors to hold closed, and being strong enough to hold the closed ones closed, even when the people on the other side are people you made. Mercy without consequence is not mercy. It is permission. Eleanor knew that, she told her lawyer. She left me the tools. If there is a young person listening to me right now, I want you to hear this part. The people who love you are not infinite. Their patience is not infinite. Their willingness to be hurt by you is not infinite. You can use it up. You can use it all the way up, and you will not know you have used it up until the moment you find yourself on a kitchen floor, looking up at a father you do not recognize anymore. And if you are my age, listening to me, I want you to hear this. You do not owe anyone your dignity. Not your children, not your in-laws, not the people at the funeral home. You spent a whole life earning it. You are allowed to keep it. You are allowed to make the call. You are allowed to sit at your kitchen table with a crossword your wife did not finish, and write in the margin, in pencil, the word she would have written in pen. Love is not the same thing as permission. I think about that every day. I will think about it the day I die.